So thank you for the very kind words. I am going to run this in a very simple way. I will speak hopefully for no more than 14 and a half minutes. And then thereafter we might have a chance to interact. We can ask questions, we can have comments, and then we'll call it a day. So I want to talk about the future of money and are we there yet? I do not intend to punish you with PowerPoints because I only have like perhaps 6 slides and they're really mostly for me. And then at the end, I will show off a picture of me summiting Mount Kenya, which is my achievement of the year. And so to get started, a little bit about me. I'm a podcaster, blogger, educator, influencer, and I've recently added mountaineer. I think it's, thank you. We do try to aspire. So a few things about me. I think most of the things have been said, but what I would really want to focus on is that, that point there that just says, in the intersection of finance and technology and the potential for digital solutions to transform the way we manage, invest, and allocate capital. I want to talk to you in a few minutes about the few things that I've learned by being born and raised in Zimbabwe, in Harare. That is where I come from. So I come from a Southern African country. I always like to describe it as a teapot-shaped country called Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. One of the things Zimbabwe is most popular about is because we've had one of the highest inflation rates in the world, and also because we've had one of the largest banknotes in the world. We went up as high as $1 trillion note back in 2008. It was a privilege to be alive to see it. I'll talk to that shortly. So I want to just talk about the future of money and the things we can learn from the 3 cities that I have had an opportunity in the past few years to live and work in. Born and raised in Harare, went for graduate school in Capetown in South Africa, and then finally currently living and working in Nairobi. So a few things with respect to my journey. So how do I summarize Harare? For me, Harare is a place of continuous circles. It's like we're in a vortex. We keep going round and round to the same thing. Our currency begins to accumulate more zeros. We slash them. We start over, round and round and round and round. And I'll talk about how cash and crypto come into the mix in Harare. So here's a quick picture. I'll have 3 pictures for us to reflect on. For the other ones, you'll see that I'll put the currencies for the specific cities I'll talk to. But for this one, this is one of my favorite pictures because this was 2008, 15 years ago exactly. I'd just started a job. I'd just gotten married. I had no kids yet. And things were really crazy because by then I was still an investment analyst in banking. And I think that particular year is the year that gave me enough burnout to chase me out of banking and put me into development spaces, simply because I could not keep up with the reporting. Each time something major happened, as analysts, we had to write to all of our clients, assure them how their portfolios would not go down and things like that. But I want to just say a few things about that. One thing I've learned, or a few things I've learned in Harare. The first one is that being in Harare, there really is no one who is averse, or there's no one really who is protected when money issues happen. And so what will happen is that in all of those cycles, we would all be brought together, rich or poor, small, large or medium, by this thing which is inflation, common suffering for all. It spares absolutely no one. And so you would find that we at some point became a cashless society by default, not because we didn't want to use cash, but there really was no cash. Or alternatively, if you had cash, it had absolutely no value. That little boy, does anyone want to guess how much he's holding? Okay, we'll have chance for question and answer. That will be my first question. So we'll come back to that. So start to think about how much you think that boy is holding. And I'll tell you the answer right at the end. Cash was king in the country at some point, but you couldn't find it. It was literally a very difficult thing to find it. And so what then tended to happen is that we had a black market because we couldn't find foreign currency in the country. I want to tell you something that you must remember about Zimbabwe, which is really interesting. And also something that you must remember about Africa in general, which is really interesting. HBEI stands for what is called the hard-boiled egg index. All right? And here is how it works. If you walk into any African country, you will find that in street food, there's something that is sold in every African country. It's a hard-boiled egg. And generally, for $1, you should be able to get the equivalent of 6 hard-boiled eggs. And so if you do the math, you should then be able to determine what the rate for $1 to the local currency in any country is with respect to hard-boiled eggs. So here's a simple example. If you walk in Harare right now, the price of one hard-boiled egg is 1,000 Zimbabwean dollars. But we know that for $1, you can get 6 boiled eggs. And so, if for $1 you can get 6 boiled eggs, and each egg is $1,000, I know I'm really taking you back into math territory. Anne has 5 apples, she eats 2. But here's the thing. The fact that one egg is 1,000 Zimbabwe dollars and 6 eggs is 6,000 gives you what we call an implied rate. So we have what we call a hard-boiled egg index. Go to Zambia, you'll find that for $1, hard-boiled eggs are rated at a certain number of kwachas. So you can actually be able to find in any African country what the street rate is towards the dollar by what we call the hard-boiled egg index. And this I would like to attribute to a friend of mine who's called Happy Zengeni, who came up with this around 2008 when we had that situation in Zimbabwe. Now, what then tended to happen is because cash was not to be found, we literally leapfrogged a whole lot of things and people just preferred to use mobile money. 2011, our country's biggest Econet, which was the biggest telecoms company, came up with a mobile product which is called EcoCash. And EcoCash, to be fair, was really a clone of M-Pesa, which I'll speak about in Kenya, and that helped. And now people were literally just forced to start to use things like mobile money, as well as banking cards. There used to be this mantra, health for all, by the year 2000. In Zimbabwe, it became cards for all by the year 2000, not because we wanted cards, but probably it was the most convenient way of paying for everything, right? And then we had our crypto season that started on or about 2013, 2014, and a certain gentleman that I used to work with in Muzinda Hub built up a crypto platform that was called Golix, and people went crazy about Bitcoin. And we were one of those. Are there any crypto bros? I don't know. I can't see any. They might be there. But people were like, Bitcoin fixes everything. Until we realized you do need the internet. You do need to have smart devices. You need to have the different wallets and all of that stuff. So we went through that craze. And so we basically became aware of some of these things, not because we wanted to, but because the situation forced us to. So leapfrogging is definitely a lesson to take away from Zimbabwe. But I'll tell you this. While technology is amazing and it is great, and I sit right now in the intersection of finance and technology in my present work, I will tell you that given a chance, people generally just prefer cash. And what is the lesson here? While technology is great, for most people, cash tends to be the default if they're not ready. If they don't have internet, if they cannot access every other thing, they'll still have a hunger for cash. That still is the issue in Zimbabwe. Let's move along very quickly and let's talk about Cape Town. I spent a few years, I would say 2 years of my life in undergraduate school in Cape Town. And Cape Town is a city that I really love in South Africa. And I would say that in there, what I experienced was what I would call relative stability. You have some of the richest people in the world sitting in some of the suburbs in Cape Town. But on my way to Stellenbosch, where I went for graduate school, we would drive from a place called Parklands, where some friends were staying, all the way to Stellenbosch. And along the way, you would pass through a place called Khayelitsha, where people are literally stealing power and just pulling wires so that they have power in their houses in the same city. Now, what I find about Cape Town is whilst there was relative stability, there were spectrums. You see the really rich and you see the truly poor, yes? And possibly not so much of people in between. But I'll tell you this, and I'm going to use a word we used to describe because that's how South Africans pronounce the word. We call it country, they say country. Okay, so we call that card country, for the simple reason that what I found really fascinating is that for the smallest, tiniest of transactions, people in South Africa, people in Cape Town would use cards. They're paying for a 10 Rand transaction, they're swiping. They're paying for a 1,000 Rand transaction, they're swiping, which was really odd for someone who was coming from Zim, where we use cards for meaningful transactions. Why? Because for us, bank charges were a thing. And yet here comes a nation where they've just normalized using, cards. E-wallet is a thing. They didn't really have mobile money in the same way as Harare and Kenya or Nairobi would have it. But you see that people use banking apps because their banks already have bank apps. And by default, whether rich or poor, people just wake up and this technology is there because they have better things than Zimbabwe. They have connectivity. They probably have smartphones. Things are a bit better in that particular economy. And so you'd find that in Cape Town, there's so much range, so much flexibility. There's a type of music, if we had time, and if we had the setup, I would have played something for you called Amapiano, which is unique to South Africa. But what I'll tell you is that particular kind of music has several beats, right? It will start with an initial, I would call it grounding beat, right? So maybe it could be a drum, boom, 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 boom. They add a whistle, whoop, 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 whoop. They add a little tinking thing, tickety, 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 and before you know it, there's all sorts of things happening in that music. But South Africans also generally, when it comes to dancing in Africa, those are our leaders. Yeah, those guys are flexible. They will do what they call the vosho, which I will not try and do in full because I don't want to break anything while I'm in Europe. But let me just say this. Lots of flexibility, much like their financial systems. And you'll find that because they had probably a better base, they have many more crypto platforms, you know, your Luno, your Vara, simple processes. They're even ingrained into their banking systems. So what do we as Zimbabweans do? We are very opportunistic people. We are smart. We move quickly. We would cross over to South Africa, open bank accounts there, and then tap into crypto systems using South African bank accounts because they've got something called a non-resident account. So that's us. What are the biggest lessons from South Africa? For me, the biggest takeaway from SA is that technology is great. They have it, but there's also a chance that you could leave some people behind. Because you see that there are people at the high end of the spectrum who are using everything, who are living large, but the people at the larger, or rather at the very bottom of the pyramid, literally, who can potentially be left behind. And so you would find that a lot of the work in financial inclusion in that space in Cape Town is trying to see how do we bring the poorest of the poor to also, you know, closely participate in wealth building within the same ecosystem. They have supposedly equal access, but they don't necessarily use it in the same way. Let me quickly rush and finish with Nairobi. And I like to call myself a Nairobi because Nairobi is, after Zimbabwe, the love of my life. All of my Kenyan friends describe me as a Zimbabwean, you know, a Kenyan lady who happened to be born in Zimbabwe. But I've loved, and I still love living in that city because when it comes to money and mobile money applications and innovation, I will tell you that Nairobi is definitely our leader. From the country that recently celebrated its 60 years of its independence, we get one of the best solutions on mobile money in the world, which is called M-Pesa. And I'll tell you something. There is absolutely nothing you cannot pay for when it comes to M-Pesa. It could be a transaction for cows. It could be buying sweets. It could be anything, really. There's absolutely nothing you cannot pay for. What I love about that particular currency or the particular setup in Nairobi is the fact that people have a preference for that particular local product. So no one is crying necessarily for Apple Pay because you can just do so much. It's so versatile. And I want to tell you that it's interesting that regardless of exchange rate issues, I remember that the first time I went to Nairobi, it was in May 2013. And in that particular season and time, what I can tell you is that the rate then was ranging between, I think, 98 to 100, which is one United States dollar to the Kenyan shilling at that time. The most recent rate I saw, I think formally it was about 137 in the banks. But of course, there are all other places. There's always another market, which is not the right market. At the risk of incriminating myself, let me say what I know from friends, and this is not me. I have not transacted necessarily, but I'm aware that some people will go and change their money with the Indians because there's a higher rate there in certain places, because the Indians will give you a higher rate. For some things, they'll give you a higher rate some days, all right? But some people will also go and change with the Somalis because they will also give you an even better rate. Very interesting. You'll see that the hard-boiled egg index is still appearing somewhat. But I want to say that when it comes to 2023 now, you know, we are almost 37% down from what that rate was 10 years ago when I first walked into Nairobi. But still people have the confidence to put money into M-Pesa, save in M-Pesa, pay for insurance in M-Pesa, send money to your girlfriend with M-Pesa. And for me, it was really, really fascinating walking into Nairobi for a project that I'm doing for the next 2 years, being able to send back money home from the comfort of my home. You know, I underrated what M-Pesa could do. I didn't know that you could directly link to, Western Union from your M-Pesa. So midnight, and you get news from the village that your grandmother has swallowed 3 razor blades, you can send money home instantly, literally on M-Pesa, because it is so flexible and there's so much that you can do with it. And so I want to say, when it comes to the innovation hub, money-wise, I will concede that Nairobi is the home of African mobile money innovation. That is the place where I would say money and technology really converge, and there's uptake, and everybody's comfortable with that. Of course, granted, there are places where you might still need to deposit cash first, because someone will ask, how does the money get in there? For some, they'll link it with the bank accounts. It's a little bit pricier for most people. A lot will probably deposit the money as cash. Some will need to withdraw it as cash. There's obviously the cost of that. But suffice to say, go anywhere, and I can speak as someone who's been around, I think many parts of Kenya now, because I took up hiking as a hobby. That inclusion is something that you truly see within that space. So what are the lessons for us from Kenya in terms of the future of money? It is possibilities. I will now come to my last slide, because I do want to leave a few minutes for you guys to ask questions, perhaps make some comments, and then we will conclude. I want to say that cash, certainly in Africa, remains king. Because you see, when all of these technologies fail, people will still say, okay, can I look for cash? Can I transact in cash? Yeah? And so that is something I feel we should begin to think about as we move forward in the world, to say, in as much as we can bring all of these technologies, what happens when all of these things fail? I do believe that this conference was put together not so much to think about investments, but to think about how money, how cash intersects with technology. And I want us to walk away with a thinking and a reminder of, perhaps for many of us who might be in this room, and me included, the privilege we might have when we have access. Someone said one of the definitions of poverty is lack of access. And so I want to conclude this talk and say that it is important to think about the possibilities, but also always think about the person who is at the right at the bottom, and say what would happen to that person if everything else fails. And so here is my very last slide. I know it's supposed to be PowerPoints and not power paragraphs, but I didn't want to do more slides than this, so I packed everything in there. I want to say that these 3 cities will show us 3 critical lessons. It is Africa's experience with mobile payment innovation, as shown by Nairobi. It is leapfrogging traditional banking infrastructure, as shown by Harare. It is integrating the informal sector, or people who are not necessarily going to be in the digital economy anyway because you are ready, like Capetown. And ultimately, this will provide valuable insights for all of us in the world as we seek, perhaps in the future, to transition towards what we would call a cashless society. And I also want us to reflect once again. I will say this more than once. Let's always remember that when tech fails, we might have to go back to the default, which is actual hard notes and coins, which are cash. So let's always be mindful of the people at the top, but also mindful of the people who are necessarily at the bottom. And I did promise all of my friends on Twitter that there is no way this year I'm presenting anything and not showing people my summit picture. I will repeat for those who came in late. This year, I summited Mount Kenya, which is the 2nd highest mountain in Africa, 4,985 meters above sea level. Here's a chance for you to clap hands. Yes, thank you. Thank you. I see you. And so I needed to conclude with a cheesy statement that relates money and hiking, but also showing off my picture at Lenana Point. Here's my parting shot. Like climbing a mountain, the journey for all of us to financial success requires perseverance, careful planning, and taking one step at a time. I turned 40 in the past year, on the 16th of June. I'm 10 days from my next birthday, which is my next half. And I'll tell you this. When I was climbing Mount Kenya, it wasn't because I was super fit. I did realize that I needed to move step by step. I come from a landlocked country. We don't get snow. We woke up at 2 a.m. to summit that mountain. 15 minutes into the climb, it began to snow. That's how I experienced snow for the first time in my life. That's not the experience I was hoping for. I really hoped to build a snowman, play with snowballs, but like a lot of people turned back. But the only thing that made me persevere is not that I was super fit. It is because I just counted the value of every step. And so I want to say, one step at a time, just as a hiker will conquer new heights, so too can you as an individual conquer your financial goals and reach the summit of prosperity. I wish the same for my continent, Africa. I wish the same for the beloved 3 cities. And I wish the same for the world, that as we move We know we are moving faster than we've ever moved our whole lives. But let's be considerate and mindful that we move step by step as we go towards the future of money, so that we indeed leave no man, woman, child, or indeed pet behind. And so on that happy note, I want to close, and I want to leave exactly 7 minutes for you to, if there are any quick questions, might there be a hand so that someone will help us to moderate, maybe 2 or 3 quick questions, and then we are good to go for the next session. But you were first, we have a second one, and you can be third. All right, so 3 quick questions, and I think there's a roving mic. The lady there. So 3 questions only.
Hi. Thank you so much. Great talk. Really enjoyed it. Since you were talking about 3 African cities, I was wondering about the rural and urban divide. Can you tell us something about how, cash and e-cash is working outside of these cities?
Excellent question. I will say that there is a clear divide. And I think I don't know whether I think I probably forgot something that I should have put in there, which was, I took it out. Preconditions. You will find that it's always important that there be infrastructure, people will need devices, and then for you to be online and have the internet, it is pricey. Data is pricey in most places. So the divide is clear. Urban people will easily hop onto apps. Rural people need more of USSD. So if you are building really, even within the cities, we really should actually be mindful that the people in the urban areas might use apps, but the people who are in most rural areas can only use what we call USSD or not at all. So they'll almost always default to cash. Very, very important reflection, and probably something for us to think about. Shall we move on to the second one?
Yeah, thank you so much for your also sharing real experiences. I'm also working for GAZ for a blockchain project and currently looking into its potential for financial inclusion. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, since you shared in the South African context, you said we need to be aware that we don't leave people behind. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, isn't there the potential to actually include people through digital tools or blockchain potentially who don't have access to the formal financial sector yet, because that's often what blockchain is promising to do, banking the unbanked, or building a digital credit history for savings groups or whatever. And I was wondering, do you have examples where that actually worked, or what's your take on this?
So I can definitely put my take on this. 2014, I was sitting in a panel for what was called a blockchain forum, and we were talking about that. It comes back to preconditions as well. If people are not off-taking simple things like mobile money, then to expect that they would jump onto... The question is, how do you connect them even with blockchain? I get the idea. And like I said, I know the tech bros will always say, Bitcoin fixes it. I do like the technology that is blockchain. I think it has opportunity to help us on a number of things. For example, in Harare, a lot of people are on the housing queue, and there's a lot of corruption around it because you can't really tell who was in first. Blockchain can already tell you through timestamps who went in first. Lots of things it could, in theory, fix. But again, we come back to the preconditions. If there's a way for a fix that has USSD, have people tap into blockchain, then it's a yes. If we have to depend on the internet, then I think we are probably jumping the gun too much. So let's get started, but I think let's be mindful of what realistically could happen. In the future, yes. So perhaps that could be a nice place to answer my own question. The future of money, are we there yet? Not yet, but we hopefully can get there step by step and hopefully reach our summit. That would be my first impression. Thank you. Okay, let's come to the last one. I think we had a gent. Always important to have a gentleman represented. They are a previously disadvantaged group. It's always been ladies first. So finally, a gentleman.
Well, thank you for a very inspiring talk. I was wondering, you mentioned cash is king. Let's fast forward 5 years. Let's say most people have implemented these digital tools. If no one has cash anymore, how would people get cash in case everything fails? I mean, if you would have a fallback option to cash, it means that people would have to keep a stack of cash at home. Otherwise, if you don't have it in the moment everything fails, how do you get it in that situation?
I wonder too. This was really the inspiration for this talk, to say what will happen if we do not have cash. And I think one thing I didn't see coming definitely was COVID. They call that, I think they call it a black swan event, something no one sees coming. So when it came, we weren't necessarily all prepared for it. I do wonder, and I worry for my continent, that in as much as we want to move very fast, I would still ask then what happens if the technology fails and we no longer have cash. I think in 5 years, we still have a high risk of leaving quite a number of people behind. So I think this should be a shared responsibility. What should we do, people? I'm going to drop the mic at that particular point and say, what do you think we should do? Does anyone think they have a solution? Because I'm happy to crowdsource one. Mine was just to inspire and perhaps... No one? No one has a solution? Okay, I'm going to give you homework because I'm the child of 2 teachers. This is your homework. Go and find a solution. What happens if everything fails and there's absolutely no cash? Okay, I see that there's a woman who's ready to save the world. Go for it.
Of course. Maybe we start trading stuff.
Maybe we start trading stuff, she's saying. So we start to go backwards, right? So we were here with technology. We go to cash, and then we go back to barter trade. And then thereafter, we are exchanging stones and shells. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it could be interesting. We might have to trade. I want to leave this as a rhetoric question, as an open question, perhaps something that we can reflect on. And perhaps this should be the talk that I do next year, right? My solutions on how we can solve difficult and important problems.
Can't wait. Give a round of applause. Kudzai M Mubaiwa.